A few days ago, our channel produced a video telling the story of Huawei's youngest vice president, Yinan. However, the more famous story about this rebellious genius who left Huawei with a bang is a life-and-death struggle that unfolded over 2 decades ago between him and the tech giant. Yinan and Ren Zhengfei, Harbor Networks and Huawei. They together scripted one of the most dramatic episodes in the history of China's high-tech entrepreneurship. For decades, no one has given up on unraveling the truth behind Harbor's failure. Everyone has their own theories: founders' inherent character flaws, the culture of going public too quickly, industry trends not aligning with their time, the ruthless tactics of the former employer, the short-sightedness of overseas investors, and so on. Decades later, even through the screen, we can still feel the intensity of this life-and-death battle. Without further ado, let's watch today's video together. The phenomenon of corporate defectors forming devilish pacts with overseas funds, rapidly expanding, eventually becoming direct competitors with their former employers, and even toppling their dominion. This kind of business drama has played out repeatedly in China in recent years. Some succeeded, while others failed. The most emblematic case of failure, however, is Yinan's journey with Huawei. Does his fate signal the end of this corporate defector and overseas fund successfully challenging the former employer business model in China, at least in the high-tech industry? Let's start from the beginning. In April 2000, at the Shenzhen Five Continents Hotel, Huawei's president Ren Zhengfei led several dozen core executives to a grand farewell party. The atmosphere in the room was very emotional. This farewell party was for one person, Yinan, who, before leaving, was Huawei's executive vice president and widely recognized as one of the most influential figures within the company. Yinan, who held the position of vice president in charge of R&D at Huawei at the young age of 27, was a rare technical prodigy. Even in today's ever-changing world, when people talk about Yinan, they still say, he was incredibly talented in technology, especially in his sensitivity to the intersection of technology and the market. Huawei's president, Ren Zhengfei, has repeatedly expressed he's really talented and has a profound understanding of issues. If he were to make personal investments, he would definitely invest in Yinan. Of course, there was another reason for such a high-profile farewell: it symbolized support for internal entrepreneurship. Around 2000, to streamline the management hierarchy and to establish a strong channel for Huawei's struggling data communication products, a group of individuals were encouraged to leave and become agents for Huawei's data products. Ren Zhengfei certainly did not anticipate that the genius he had high hopes for, to help Huawei expand in the data market, might be thinking about 2 other things at the moment: financing and talent recruitment. Having joined Huawei right after graduating from university, he had risen to the position of vice president at the age of 27. He quickly became the rumored successor to Huawei's highly regarded president Ren Zhengfei, with enticing stock options, employee shares, and flexible career advancement opportunities. Now, he intended to surpass Huawei and create a more ambitious enterprise. Otherwise, why would he leave Huawei? When he left Huawei, he received equipment worth 10 million renminbi through equity bonuses and settlements. Imagine if Huawei were a publicly traded company, how much more would he have received? So, he had a rough idea: more career opportunities, more tempting stock incentives, and more provocative goals. Going public. The underlying logic could probably be distilled into attracting the best talent through this rule. With talent in the telecommunications industry comes technology and market share, which in turn drives stock market value, forming a virtuous cycle. He wanted to replicate the Huawei myth. The 3 words Yinan carried significant weight within Huawei. Soon, in 2001, hundreds of core R&D and marketing professionals from Huawei joined Harbor. Eventually, Harbor adopted nearly everything from Huawei, from its organizational structure, corporate culture, work methods, and even working hours. This earned it the nickname Little Huawei. Harbor Networks even claimed these broadband network products, which are the most widely used and mainstream in broadband network construction, lead domestic major competitors, including Huawei, by 12 to 18 months. Meanwhile, venture capital firms had shown favor to Yinan and his Harbor Networks right from the start. In May 2001, renowned international venture capital firms like Walden and Hong Kong-based Dragon Venture Capital jointly invested $19 million in the newly established Harbor Networks. What they valued was Yinan and his team's technical background and market performance. However, what Yinan never anticipated at the time was that it was these former Huawei employees and the products they developed that would be used by Huawei to create a situation of intellectual property lawsuits during his 2 subsequent IPOs and negotiations with Siemens. This disrupted his overall strategy. For Harbor Networks, the pressure from Huawei was inevitable. Given Li Yinan's intelligence and understanding of Ren Zhengfei, he could not have failed to anticipate it. However, he only needed a time gap, the time for Huawei to realize his threat and react. As long as this time was long enough, it would enable Harbor Networks to grow rapidly and complete its IPO. By that time, Huawei would be powerless to stop him, but they both miscalculated. When Ren Zhengfei learned that Li Yinan, who had once regarded Huawei as his own and had vowed just a year ago to help Huawei expand into the data market, while strictly adhering to industry non-competition agreements, was now shaking the foundations of Huawei, he was furious. Immediately, Ren Zhengfei issued a kill order against Harbor Networks. In 2002, Huawei officially revoked Harbor's agency rights and significantly increased its efforts in market expansion. In 2003, Huawei established a joint venture with 3Com dedicated to the mid- and low-end data market. By 2004, the Huawei 3Com joint venture was operating successfully, and the lawsuit with Cisco had concluded. It was at this time that the infamous Huawei's attack on Harbor office was established. It was said that this office had 2 basic principles: 1, let Harbor Networks generate revenue but not make a profit, and 2, absolutely prevent Harbor from going public. Simultaneously, they conducted anti-headhunting operations, with Huawei poaching R&D personnel from Harbor's access network product line. Reportedly, Huawei allocated up to 400 million renminbi for this purpose in a year, while Harbor Networks' accounts receivable at the same time were only 400 million renminbi. Soon, Harbor Networks found it challenging to operate in the market. By 2005, Harbor's R&D couldn't keep up with market developments, many promised new features couldn't be delivered, and after the market started to decline, many commitments to individual users also became unfulfillable. It was a vicious cycle. To fundamentally escape this predicament, Harbor Networks had always pinned its hopes on one way out: going public. That way, Harbor's strength would be greatly enhanced. But absolutely not allowing it to go public was another fundamental principle of Huawei. In August 2004, at a critical moment when Harbor Networks was making its first push towards an overseas IPO, Goldman Sachs, the investment bank responsible for underwriting, received an email from an anonymous source. The email alleged that Harbor Networks was involved in fabricating false sales data. Harbor Networks Audit Committee then hired a well-known independent investigation firm in the United States to conduct a comprehensive investigation of the company by the end of August that year. However, no evidence of leaking sales data from within the company was found. Ernst & Young also reviewed Harbor's sales contracts and did not discover any fraudulent activities. The overall situation was becoming increasingly unfavorable for Harbor Networks, with a significant turning point being the emergence of improved intellectual property protection. At the end of 2004, China's explanations on certain issues regarding the application of law in handling criminal cases of infringement of intellectual property rights officially came into effect. This explanation significantly lowered the threshold for criminal sanctions related to intellectual property rights infringement. In May 2005, 3 of Li Yinan's former colleagues at Huawei were sentenced to 2 to 3 years in prison by the Shenzhen Intermediate People's Court in Guangdong Province. The reason for their conviction was the infringement of their former employer Huawei's intellectual property, and this became the famous Huka Case. In September 2005, just as Harbor Networks was gearing up for its second IPO attempt, the legal department of Harbor Networks received a lawyer's letter from Huawei. Huawei stated its intention to file a lawsuit against Harbor Networks for intellectual property infringement. Huawei's strategy was undeniably effective. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission never explicitly said Harbor Networks couldn't go public, but their investigation, along with that of other departments, remained inconclusive. At this point, Harbor's financial lifeline was on the verge of breaking, and venture capital funding could not last indefinitely. By the end of 2005, Harbor Networks, apart from cooperating with other equipment vendors, including asset sales, had run out of options. Earlier, Harbor Networks had an OEM collaboration with Siemens, and Siemens, at that time, had a renewed interest in the data communication market. On December 23, 2005, Siemens formally signed an acquisition agreement with Harbor Networks, purchasing the main products of Harbor Networks for $110 million, while the stripped-down Harbor Networks with its core assets and technology turned to providing OEM services to Siemens. However, this agreement was never formally executed, primarily due to Huawei's influence. Huawei had already formed a joint venture with Siemens, Dingqing Communications, to engage in TD-SCDMA research and development, and they had also signed various cooperation agreements in other areas. Huawei's importance to Siemens far surpassed that of Harbor Networks, and intellectual property issues remained a critical concern for all parties. At this point, almost all doors of survival had been closed to Yinan and Harbor Networks. In just 5 years, the life and death struggle of Huawei is a story that cannot be fully covered in our brief video, and we will share more details in future installments. This concludes today's video. See you next time.